If you are gluten intolerant, this is not the video for you because we are talking about pure gluten. Hello everyone, my name is Lisa and I'm the Viet Vegan because I'm Vietnam vegan, and today we're making a recipe that I've been meaning to make for many years now. It's washed flour seitan. Now if you're not familiar with what seitan is or what washed flour seitan is, let me just go on a little bit of a deep dive. But if you want to go straight into the seitan making, I'll leave the timestamps down below. Seitan is a type of vegan mock meat that has been very traditional and made throughout history. Other names have been called wheat meat. It is something that can be traced back centuries. There's versions of it that are traditional in Chinese culture as well as in Buddhist culture, because seitan and wheat meat is very common amongst Buddhist traditions because they are typically vegetarian. If you're not familiar with what gluten is the protein within wheat. So it's what gives bread its chew, it's what gives bread often its tenderness. So there's two different methods traditionally to make seitan. It's either washed flour method or just using pure vital wheat gluten, which is the already pure form of gluten, I guess. In regular all-purpose flour, you often have the starch and then you have the gluten. There's also the bran, but for all-purpose flour, the bran is usually filtered out. In the washed flour method, you take all-purpose flour, whole wheat flour, bread flour, whatever flour you want, as long as it's a higher protein content. My all-purpose flour is around 11.5% protein. Bread flour would be even better for this because you get, I think, 13 or higher percent of protein. The recipe that I'm going off of, that I used sort of, is like an aggregate. What's the word? It's taken from a bunch of different recipes because none of the recipes I found were like comprehensive enough for like what I was looking for and what questions I had asked or like what I wanted. I feel like a lot of the instructions are kind of vague or the pictures just don't do enough for me, I guess. We're gonna go with my measurements, but like I said, there are other methods and other original creators out there that I'll link in my blog post and down below for the washed flour method. I first encountered the washed flour method through the Seitan Appreciation Society Facebook group and the Seitan Society website. I'm pretty sure they're one and the same, or like created by the same person or group of people, but I'll link both down below if you want the original sources. So you're gonna mix together all-purpose flour. So I used 1,200 grams of all-purpose flour and 3 cups of water. You're just gonna take all of that, put it in a bowl, and just mix it. It'll take a little while. Be prepared to, work your biceps. Triceps. I had like a pump going on from kneading this dough. It was actually kind of great. I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna do any gym stuff today. You're gonna get like a pretty shaggy dough at first, but then you're gonna knead it into this dry ball. Don't worry if it seems too dry for you. Once you have everything incorporated, it will rehydrate. Plus you're gonna be soaking this in water or letting it rest in water anyway. Knead everything together and keep kneading and kneading and kneading. This will take about 5 to 10 minutes until when you sort of roll it into like a ballish shape or gather into a ballish shape, you'll have like a decently smooth dough, which will tell you that the gluten is formed enough. And the other thing that will tell you that the gluten is formed is if you poke it and it bounces back. Now it won't bounce completely back or spring completely back, but if you poke it and it just leaves like a dent, you need to knead more. I've seen people say that you can use a bread maker or a KitchenAid stand mixer to knead this. My stand mixer, while it is going strong, I don't think it's going that strong. I don't need to test it. I got that in like 2011. My 10-year-old KitchenAid mixer can really only handle like cookie dough so much, let alone pure flour and water. You're gonna mix that until it's nice, smooth, bounces back with a poke. Then you're gonna let it rest for 1 to 2 hours in some cold water. For this process, you're gonna use cold water until you cook it. So just continue using cool/cold water. The gloves really do help insulate your hands from feeling too chilly or too cold though. Cover that, let it rest at room temperature for 2 hours. Then after that 2 hours, I dumped out all the water and then I started washing away the flour. Now you can save the starch and use it to make so many different things. I have in a video coming up my 2 experiments with the washed starch from the seitan. I made bacon. And I also made yang pea noodles. I don't know if that's pronounced properly. Cold skin noodles. I made cold skin noodles. I really enjoyed the noodles. I have a lot of adjustments to make with the bacon. I can link the original recipe that I saw do this in the description down below. When I tested that with some modifications, I didn't really like it. I feel like there are a lot of improvements that I can make on it. But it does look very bacon-like, which is very cool. I have a bunch of it in my freezer, which you can kind of see, and like, that kind of looks like bacon, doesn't it? My kitchen smells like bacon now. That's so weird. That's in an upcoming video, don't you worry. The next part of this wash flour method is basically washing the starch away. I don't know why that was such a struggle to say. I used a large bowl to catch the starchy water because I wanted to save it to make noodles and bacon. If you don't have any plans to do that, you can just wash it away. It kind of seems wasteful. I'm sure there are other recipes that you can do with it, but you know, that's you do you, okay? I think I did 3 or 4 passes of the water and I saved all of that starchy water in this container. However much water you use, I basically just filled the bowl with water until it just barely covers all of the seitan. You just massage with your hands. It's actually really fun and very satisfying to do. It takes about, I would say 15 minutes total to wash all of this out. It is a little bit labor intensive, but the seitan in the end is super, super fun. After the first pass, you'll sort of see the starch kind of swell and the seitan will start to swell and you'll see it start to come apart. Don't worry about that. Just like keep going at it because it'll all come together towards the end. So feel free to have like all the bits hanging out. Like it doesn't really matter because when you're going to strain that anyway, you're going to strain it through a colander so it goes into the container. So you don't lose any of the bits and then you're going to keep washing them over and over. After the second pass of washing, I noticed that it was starting to look more like seitan. After my third pass, I thought that I was done, but it was just kind of like a spongy mess, which tells me now that I didn't go long enough washing out all the starch because it wouldn't come together to be like this like stretchy mass that I could sort of twist and knot. Just keep washing until you get this like weird, dense, spongy mass. There's another method where you don't wash it as much. I think you stop where I kind of got stuck, that you can start to blend in different stuff. That is entirely possible. I didn't try that personally, but I'll link it down below if you want to try it. I think after like 3 or 4 of the washed flour passes, the water will be relatively clear, or not clear, but it won't be as cloudy. You'll have kind of like a murky, but almost translucent water amount. And by that point, you're gonna put it in a colander. And I like to give it a squeeze to get out as much water as possible. And then you're gonna let it sit for about 20 minutes to drain as much water as you can, because you don't want like a soggy mess anyway. You want it to absorb the flavor from the broth that you're making, but we'll get there in a second. Once that is fully drained, you're gonna see it all stick together pretty nicely. Once it rests as well, it'll give you the opportunity to stretch it. If you work the dough too much and you find that it's not stretching the way you want it to, just give it a rest for like 15-20 minutes because then the gluten will relax again and that way you can realign gluten strands so you can pull it to create those knots. I saw a bunch of different people just like pulling it apart like really, really long and then like knotting it and knotting it and knotting it. So you have this string of like 8 or 10 knots. Another person that I saw, I can't remember, I watched so many videos, I can't remember which video it was, but I saw someone cut it into like a braid of like 4 or 5 and then they just braided that and then tied that into a few knots. Now, I am not that skilled. I cut it into 3 strands and keeping the loop at the top to keep it all connected. And then I braided that and I tied that into like 1.5 knots sort of. If you want it to have like a really like terry, chickeny texture, then you can knot it more or you can pull it more. I don't think you need to get that intense about the knotting. Before you get to like the pulley knotty section of the seitan, what I've seen other people do is they take that gluten spongy mass and they blend it with either beans, tofu, spices, whatever, and they put in seasonings in it. There was another try where I tried to do it in like a more chickeny sort of broth and it worked out kind of. I couldn't really knead it in. I think it really does benefit from using a food processor to sort of like blitz it all in. And then once it's all like come apart, you'd be afraid of like breaking the gluten strands, but if you let it rest, the gluten will sort of like bind back together in a weird freaky way. Again, I haven't tried that yet, but one day I will and I will show you those results. What I did was I put this in my Instant Pot at a slow cooker setting. If you have a slow cooker or if you just want to do it on the stove, you can do that as well. I just like either a slow cooker or Instant Pot because it just regulates the temperature and the time for me, and I'm lazy. So I just used this Better Than Bouillon paste. I have the vegetarian beef broth base. It is completely vegan. Make sure if you buy it, you buy the one that says vegetarian and is vegan on it. I was kind of going for like a beefy flavor. In retrospect, it probably would make more sense if I did a chickeny flavor, but I went for beef. Here we are. So you have your knotted mass, you put it in the Instant Pot, you cover it, put it on venting because you don't want it to actually pressure cook. Maybe you do like chickweed style, but that's not the method that I was trying today. And then you're gonna let it slow cook for about 2 hours. You can go a little bit longer, I think, but if you go too much longer, it'll get really tough. And you don't wanna boil this, you don't wanna crank up the heat, you don't really wanna rush this because if you rush the heat and the cooking process of this, it'll be really, really tough and really rubbery. Speaking from experience. Let it cool for about 2 hours at room temperature so that you can can put it in the fridge and let it rest completely for, I would say, 8 hours. You can eat it right away, but it won't have that same really developed structure and texture. But like I said, you can eat it right away. It doesn't really matter that much. It'll just be squishier or like spongier almost if you eat it right away. I let it cool in the fridge in the broth so that it wouldn't dry out. And then the next day I pulled it apart and oh my God, it was so cool. It looked like chicken. Now, because this is just the base recipe with no other add-ins, no other flavors, it's just gluten, it was a little bit rubbery. It is a tough texture, but it wasn't unpleasant. I mean, here's a sneak peek, but I pan fried it for liang pi noodles. Dude, that was so good. It was so like chewy and bouncy and tasty. I wouldn't recommend overcooking it because in Eddie's words, it gets like a stale crunchy, but I liked it. And then in an upcoming video, I used this in some char siu bao, so stay tuned for that. This is the video that goes before the char siu bao. So I've tried slicing it, and you can either just completely shred it and have all these gluten shreds to use whenever you want. I'm pretty sure they freeze well. They store in the fridge pretty well, although I store it with like a little bit of broth so that it doesn't completely dry out. But I've seen lots of people just store it like in the fridge without any broth at all. I think the broth just keeps it kind of like, you know, moist and tender. I really enjoyed this method. It was really fun to make. I've been enjoying experimenting with the wheat starch noodles, although it does take up a bit of room in your fridge. That one main container that I have, I store in the fridge, and whenever I use it, I let it settle for at least like 4 hours, and you'll see this clear divide between the water and the starch. You're gonna wanna pour off all that water before you cook with that starch, and then use fresh water for whatever you're gonna be using that with. That's an upcoming video. It was a good time. Highly recommend trying this. And I'm so inspired by the different recipe ideas and different methods that people have been experimenting with in the Facebook group. The only downside with the Facebook group is that a lot of people don't cook with a recipe, right? So they don't write down what they do. As a result, when all the people in the Facebook group ask for a recipe, I'm like, I am curious as to like what method you used, how long you cooked that. But they're like, I don't use a recipe. It's like, okay. I will hopefully be experimenting more and sharing actual recipes with you so that you can duplicate those results at home. But the amount of stuff that people have been doing by using like either sugarcane or like a parsnip spear as like a drumstick or rice paper as like the chicken skin, it's really, really cool and really creative. And I have a lot of plans to play around with this. Washed Flour Seitan, it's fun. I would recommend trying it. I do like it better than I think traditional seitan with using vital wheat gluten because it doesn't have that like, it's not like a stinky flavor, but it's like a strong gluten flavor. Do you know what I'm talking about? I don't find that happen as much with a washed flour seitan. I wonder if it's because of the process that it's used to refine that gluten flour, but I don't really know. I don't know a lot about it. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you also try washed flour seitan. I'll leave a link down below to a blog post where I sort of chronicle my recipe that I used for this and my method for making this batch. I'll link all the different resources that I consulted for deciding how I would tackle this seitan. It's a good time. Let me know if you try it, what your favorite methods of washed flour seitan or regular seitan are. Thank you so much for watching and I hope you have a delicious day. Bye.